Hello and welcome to the Innovation Women Speak webinar series. My name is Bobby Carlton. I'm the founder of Innovation Women. Innovation Women is a visibility bureau for entrepreneurial, technical, and professional women. Our mission is to eliminate the all-male, all-pale, and often all-stale panels you see so often at industry conferences and events. We connect women with speaking opportunities, and we connect event managers with awesome speakers who just happen to be women. Innovation Women is so much more than a traditional speakers bureau. Event managers can search the database for free, and speakers pay just $100 a year to become a member. They get a profile on the platform and access to lists of speaking opportunities as well as a number of other cool benefits. We recently rolled out a number of new features. Speakers can see how often their profile is visited. They can notify us to promote their speaking engagements, and event managers can easily create and store lists of speakers on the platform as they build out their events. If you'd like more information on Innovation Women, just check out our website. For our webinar attendees, we have a special offer of 20% off your first year. It's like coffee money when you break it down. You're probably spending more visiting Starbucks. Back when we could visit all the Starbucks and go inside, but I digress. Just use the code IWWebinar, all capital letters, for 20% off your first year. Before we move on, we're going to take a quick look at what's coming up on our webinar schedule. This year, our webinar series has a new theme every month. August theme is Female Founders. All of our webinar speakers are Innovation Women members. If you're interested in applying to be one of our webinar speakers, we post the calls for speakers on our own platform. The deadline to apply for the next webinar is July 19th. And if you're already a member, keep an eye out for those opportunities on the website and in your weekly speaker exclusive newsletter. And I'd also like to encourage everyone to register for our next webinar. On July 22nd, Amy DeLuise will be sharing a presentation called Presenting Your Virtual Self, How to Rock Your Online Brand and Your Next Web Call. You'll learn 3 ways to amplify your brand through social channels, how to strategically build your network without live events, and tips for looking and sounding your best on web calls. This is a good one. I know you're going to want to be there. You can register for this webinar in the Attachments tab. And speaking of the Attachments tab, this is an annotated version of your screen. Below the video viewing window, there are tabs. The default tab is Ask a Question. You can type in a question or a comment at any time during the program. The Attachments or Links tab is where you'll see documents and links from today's speaker, and of course the link to sign up for our next webinar. You can download the attachments at any time during this webinar or from the recording. The tab called Rate This helps us determine what you like. We read all the feedback, and the Polls or Vote tab is where you see polls from our speaker. She'll be asking you a question, and you can answer it right on the screen. You can enlarge your screen to view it in full screen mode at any time, and if you need audio help, please feel free to click on the Help button at the bottom of the screen to contact Bright Talk. This also holds true if your screen freezes. You can also try to reload the screen. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you'd like to view the webinar again, you will be able to. We will send you the link after the webinar. So now on to today's presentation. With us today is Nancy Youssef. Nancy currently serves as Chief Corporate Development Officer for Souls for Souls, a nonprofit social enterprise based in Nashville, Tennessee. Ms. Youssef is also founder and president of award-winning Curves with Purpose, a woman's e-commerce marketplace celebrating shape diversity, serving sizes up to 5X curating global brands, utilizing fit tech, and helping disrupt the cycle of poverty through charitable partnerships. For those listening, please note you can ask a question at any time, and this webinar is being recorded for future playback at your convenience. Nancy, we are so excited to have you join us. We'll turn things over to you now.
Thank you so much, Bobby. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you to the Innovation Women team for allowing me this opportunity, and a special thanks to the audience and guests for joining this webinar. I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm so excited to share some experiences, hopefully shed a little light on the independent retail world, and talk about pandemic, protests, and panic. You know, as we know, brands will either win or lose in this time, and we're just going to have a little conversation about authenticity, consumer sentiment, and the need for transparency to survive in these times. As we look forward, we will talk a little bit about me, why I'm speaking, my why, and how I became an independent retailer. I'll narrate a bit of a story around Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf, and how that's relevant to today's environment, the journeys and hurdles that we're facing, the wins and losses, and naturally the moral of the story. We'll end with that. So hopefully it'll be entertaining, light, and informative at the same time. So a little about me. I like to say I'm a recovering corporate executive. I spent the first few years of my career in the investment banking world. I had what I'm calling an early life crisis, and it's me going to fashion design school. So much to my family and friends' dismay, I quit my banking job and said, okay, I'm going to fashion design school because I've only ever wanted to get into retail, and no one wants to hire a banker to be in retail as a merchandiser. And so that's what I did. I ended up leaving, had a great corporate career. For 15 years, ran the international division of a couple publicly traded companies. And then I had what probably many of us face at some point or another in our lives, sort of midlife burnout, I'm going to call it, and said, okay, I'm going to take some time off. I thought my time off would be a year or so. Well, 2 weeks later, Curves with Purpose was created, and it's been an amazing ride. That was a couple years ago. And it's a women's plus-size clothing company, as Bobby mentioned in the intro. It's an indie retailer, so an independent small business startup. And then I'd always been involved in the nonprofit world, mostly on the board side, and was fortunate enough almost a year ago, in a couple weeks, to be asked to go on full-time as a business development person for Souls for Souls. And Souls for Souls is a not-for-profit that also is in the space of retail, where it provides clothing and shoes for people in need. So it's a really interesting concept. So all my worlds sort of collide together, from corporate to independent retail to this nonprofit space now. And I even have a little side gig of teaching a class on fashion entrepreneurship. So probably, like all of you, spend too much time doing a lot of stuff. But it's all the fun ride and part of what we're going to talk about today. You know, my why is I grew up really the daughter of immigrants to the United States. An Egyptian heritage. My family immigrated here for a better opportunity, for a greater life. So what seemingly is, you know, a fairy tale story. We ended up here in the U.S. My parents really pushed passion and purpose. That was very influential in my life and my career. And when I thought about what do I want to do, always there was the underlying theme of somehow giving back, somehow being in tune with, you know, who I am, my background, my heritage, and how can I provide that either in my corporate job or in my retail space back to the consumer, or even in the nonprofit world, giving back to the customer. it's been a fascinating journey. It's a tale of American dream, and then now we have this halt of pandemic and protests and panic. And how do we survive that as an independent retailer, as somebody who started their own business or is trying to build a brand? How do you survive this time that we're in? And what do we do about it? Well, let's look at what sets you apart. And, as we're having this conversation, one of the things that I think we can keep in mind is that it's not just a view of an independent retailer, but it's somebody building their brand, whether it's their own personal brand or a startup or a nonprofit, whatever it is, really the ethos is the same. So, in our narrative here, I talk about Little Red Riding Hood and this story. She reminds me of the independent retailer. She has set out on a journey to get to the destination, which is her grandmother. In the narrative of an indie retailer, we're the same. We're on a journey. We recognize a problem in our community. We're trying to solve for it. We want to see how our path can get there, and we embark on this journey. On the other side, and it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, right? I don't actually think corporate is necessarily a big bad wolf, but when you look at these bigger organizations and bigger entities, you think about they had a great original idea. It started somewhere, right? They weren't always this big bad wolf, but somehow the evolution created distance between themselves and their consumer. And there's this journey that they somehow ended up wobbly in, and I think that's what sets us apart. As an independent retailer, you're really always on the ground, boots on the ground, you're consumer facing, you're always involved with your customer, with your community, with your brand. And there's so many obstacles along the way that you face, but you overcome those hurdles. And that's because really, as this independent retailer, what you are is you're nimble, you're a risk taker, you're customer centric, and ultimately you have freedom and flexibility. Sometimes in the bigger, more boxed structures, it's very rigid. Sometimes it's risk averse. It's all about the shareholder, and you're constrained to some extent. So, as we're taking this journey in life, as if you imagine, Little Red Riding Hood going through the forest, she's nimble. She's getting through. She's seeing everything with a lens of optimism. And that's how we are as an independent retailer. And even through these times, we have to remember that is the gift that we have. That's our ability. We're able to be nimble. We're able to be quick and responsive and connect on a much greater level with our consumer. One of my favorite quotes, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Anita Roddick. Anita Roddick is a British businesswoman. She's best known for being the founder of The Body Shop. It's a cosmetics company producing and retailing natural beauty products that really shaped ethical consumerism. And the company was one of the first to prohibit the use of ingredients tested on animals on some of its products, and one of the first to promote fair trade with developing countries. She was really clear on her why. But my favorite quote is, nobody talks about entrepreneurship as survival. But that's exactly what it is and what nurtures creative thinking. As we think about, again, this journey, this path, it's about survival. It's about how do you come out on top during these times? How do you come up on top during this pandemic, during these protests? And, what we're seeing now, and naturally any good presentation, of course, is going to have stats, so I have to share some stats with you. This is a great article that was published by McKinsey & Company called the Small Business COVID Tracker. And what this is showing us is, and this was put out on June 18th, there's a link to it if you want to see it fully, but is the vulnerability of the small business by sector and the financial risk and the effect of COVID. Before this crisis, small businesses were nearly half of the private sector jobs. Widespread business exits are wreaking longer-lasting unemployment and economic damage and temporary shutdowns. here, if you take a look closely, the areas in the light khaki, if you can see that color on your screen, those are the ones that are lower financial risk, really less affected by this pandemic. The sort of brown where it says healthcare and social assistance, those are a little bit more affected. And then the less affected but higher financial risk is this area, and this is where I fall in, which is retail, trade, manufacturing, construction, utilities. There's a huge issue, and then the highest financial risk is in this area of educational services, arts, entertainment, and recreation. Within retail, for example, 3/4 of the clothing stores reported a large negative impact on their business as of May 23rd, according to this article. But only 1/3 of food and beverage stores did. So the disparity reflects differences in which businesses were classified as essential. So, some of them post-COVID became non-essential, right? If they didn't have a mix of food and beverage, they had to be closed. For us, the story of our survival is about 6 months ago, by chance or luck or strategic, whatever we want to call it, we took our business fully online. We had been doing pop-up shops prior to that, so that means, temporary location stores, whether in malls or on streets or in fairs or whatever it was. And we decided we're going to take our business 100% online. That's sort of the way of the world right now, and we don't want to be subject to brick and mortar, to all these expenses associated with it. We took a deep dive, so it went to almost negative in sales when we shifted completely online, but it only took a few months to rebound back up. And in the wake of COVID, that first week of March, mid-March, when COVID was really happening in a full way, our increase was about 200% in that first week and just kept doubling every week after that. People are scared. People were home, they wanted to buy things, and what we found was our pivot with the consumer, we spoke to them. We really talked about what are they feeling, what do they need. We weren't trying to sell, we weren't trying to push, we were trying to focus on consumer sentiment at the time, really emphasizing with the fear, understanding who our customer was, and making sure that we were talking to that customer in a manner that was humanitarian. One of the things that I'd note on here is, as a stat to throw out there, and it impacts me personally, but minorities own 1/4 of small businesses in these most affected sectors. And really what's happening, they're particularly at risk because in most cases, surveys and most studies show that they have the lowest resilience, they have lower access to finance and capital, and that's really a struggle in this space in particular for minorities. And so it's something to think about and look at, where can we help and where can we get finances. As we sort of move along in our journey, we need to question ourselves, our business and our brand. In these times, our brand is 100% a representation of us. So as people are panicking, we have to be sort of that beacon of calm, right? We need to be as deeply human in this moment in time as we can. Because when we're in panic, we question our foundation. We question our authenticity. And trust starts to waver. And what people are looking for is that trust. So we need awareness. We need to know, who's our consumer? What are we doing to support our community? For us, we gave away clothing to people that we knew needed it. We need, for those that were going to work, for the frontline workers, for the people that were in education, we knew and were aware of what was happening in our community, and so we gave back in that way. We also found the balance between what moves us as an organization and what that consumer needs. Again, being nimble and being consumer-centric, knowing who your audience is, whether that's for your own personal brand or your own independent brand or you as a big brand, finding that balance of what moves your organization and what your consumer needs is, in the long run, one of the most critical things that you can do. And then be transparent. share with your audience, because they're probably feeling the same things that you are. Show your hunger for survival. I mean, they know if you're an independent retailer, you're a small business. If you're your own unique brand, you're a small business, right? And so we need to have that authenticity. Show trust in your consumer that by sharing with them the honesty of what's happening, that they're going to help and follow you and care for you and engage with you. And then finally, the most important step in this journey is action. Despite the panic, entrepreneurs, as Anita said, are inherently survivors. Kick the fear out, be the risk taker, continue to grow despite what may be happening. You know, for us, we had a few initiatives. Of course, financially, we had to think about our cash flow. We had to think about how do we keep growing and gaining momentum. But there were initiatives that we had planned, and we had to shift a little bit because we also have to be sensitive to the times, to current events that were happening. You know, as we know, the protests started occurring and more panic ensued. And so we had to be sensitive to the times, but we still continue to tell our story and continue on our journey to engage people and to make sure that the customer knew that we were still there. We were at the forefront of the conversation. And even in the protest conversations, we were authentic about who we were, right? So we didn't hop on bandwagons, but we were authentic to the brand, to ourselves, to even me as the owner, what our beliefs were. And so we were always messaging in authentic ways, and that's what continued to drive our consumer base. As we sort of continued on, and again, where we looked at, I had to stop and evaluate, okay, what has been our success factor and how do we continue that? How can we have the tenacity to move on? How can we be resilient? So everything's in question. You know, people are tired, they're frustrated, they're confused, including myself, including probably most of us in the audience. To create success and tenure in your business, we have to go back to that very first question that we asked ourselves, the why. What is your business plan? What was that original? Dust it off the shelves. What was your brand plan for yourself, your business plan? Go back, dust that plan off the shelves. And what was your why? Because that is the authentic message that will drive back to the consumer. For me, my why was there was a need. I grew up, again, I mentioned the heritage and the culture of the Egyptian background. Most of us in that community are plus-size women, but there was never product for us. You know, when I started looking at launching this business, it was about $67 billion of an opportunity, 70% of the population. That number has now grown to $200 billion opportunity. And the why was, I wanted every female to feel amazing about herself. And the way that that could happen was she had choices. Choices in the clothes that she could wear, choices in the attitude that she supported while she wore those clothes. And if there wasn't options, there weren't choices. And that was my why. And so I had to go back to, in this time when things sort of got upside down and things were shutting down all around me, community was faltering, I went to, what's the why? Why am I here? Why am I part of this community? And we started building that up again and talking about that. Not about sales, not about buy our product, but about here's why we're here, here's why we want to support you. You need to have choice. You need to have options. The other thing, I mean, this is, you know, it's a business conversation, right? So math's important. Manage your cash flow. There's nothing wrong with liquidation if you have to, selling things. Do what you need to do to make sure that you have the cash flow that you need to continue and support your business. That is a huge hurdle that most of us small businesses, independent retailers, don't really understand. I mean, heck, even in our own personal lives, managing our checkbooks, how many of us have found that during this time, you know, the last few months, we're spending less. So I think, you know, it's same to be said for our own personal selves as well as our own business, or even if we're thinking about starting a business, it's cash flow. And finally, engage your community, whether those are mentors or advisors. The people, the communities your brands serve always should have a seat at your table, always should be a part of the conversation. Your customer or your mentor or your advisor, you all share the same struggles, the same triumphs, the same issues and challenges that face us all. We all face them. So talk to as many people as you can. Listen to as many of these conversations as you can and get the insight and network and reach out. That's how we learn, and that's how we grow. It's really about educating ourselves and engaging within our community that we have. And, you know, as we sort of look at where are we and how do we take stock and what's the moral of our story, we look at small businesses, you know, they're fundamental. They are, like I said, employers that account for half of the private sector jobs and 2/3 of net new jobs in the last 2 decades. It's fundamental. Entrepreneurship is an engine. Small businesses create unique opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, particularly for women, minorities, and immigrants. It's creating upward mobility for people, right? So it's doing good. So inspire good. Give back to the community that has supported us. For me, that give back is through Souls for Souls. You know, we help create long-term sustainable jobs for micro entrepreneurs. So teaching a trade to people, moving it forward. Again, being transparent, being authentically your own brand and your own person. Your brand is a reflection of you. If you're wanting to start a business, if you have a business, it is your reflection. It is about you. So how do you continue to show that and be authentic and transparent? Be a role model. You know, small businesses are community hubs. In so many places, they're the backbone of many communities. They are in your little town or on your street. You know, they're who you know. They're your neighbors. They're your friends. These are people that are leaders within our community because they're in some sense activists for us, right? We're representative of the good that people want to see. And finally, I mean, this is the hardest part of it all, but is driving profit, right? Sell, liquidate, start over, do it all over again. I think you have to be empowering of yourself and be okay with, okay, it's not what I really thought was going to happen. All these crazy factors have happened, but you know, as an entrepreneur, you live the ups and downs daily. So pandemic, protests, panic, that's sort of the normal in our world. That is, every day we have that feeling. We are up and down, cyclical. The emotions are high, the emotions are low. It's all, you know, it all ebbs and flows. This is an added layer, but because we're survivors and it's about survival, you're able to overcome that. And I think these are really the 4 key pieces. Really the moral of the story is to continue to be impactful, to be inspiring good, to drive transparency, and to create progress and profit for those that are coming after you. And that's really the tale of being an entrepreneur and building a business. And that, Bobby, concludes all of this. I do have to share with the audience, just so you know, because I did not create this presentation, the format of it. Here's all the credits in case you wanted to know where it came from. But here's how you can contact me as well.
Excellent. Because those are gorgeous slides. I have to just start right off with I love these slides. Beautiful. We see a lot of slides. These are beautiful slides.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice. So audience, it is time for questions and comments. And actually, there's already a comment that someone put in here. She says, I love the idea of women have, now wait a minute. I should not assume it's a woman, but this person said, this is a comment. I love the idea of women having choices. You found a great niche for women who aren't a size 4. Smiley face. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And some other comments from folks saying they too love your slides. And we also have a couple of questions already popping in. But folks, if you want to put in a question, just put in a question in the chat to us. The first question already is, in retrospect, would you have still left corporate to become an independent retailer? So, any regrets?
No, 100% I would do it over and over and over again. You know, I think the reality is it was the right time for me. You know, I genuinely believe everything happens for a reason and in the right time that it should. And that was the right time, and the work that I've done with the support of a huge community, I feel good about, and I'm grateful to be doing it and to continue to help other people as well. So no, I don't regret it.
Okay. We have another question. What is the question you get asked most about your work?
Wow. I think the question that I get asked the most is, how do you balance it? So I have a husband, 2 boys, 2 cats, and a dog. You know, multiple hands in multiple things. So, you know, my startup, the nonprofit world, and the teaching. So it's really how you balance it all. And the answer to that question, if I can answer it, is one day at a time. You're not going to be perfect at everything every day. So choose your lane that day, and that's what you focus on, and be okay with it.
Yeah, I get asked the question a lot as well, because I have a couple of companies, and so people want to know how I divide my time usually. And I'm like, well, I work full-time here, full-time there, and full-time here.
Yeah.
And they're like, that doesn't work.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Next question from our audience. How do you manage times of high stress right now in terms of self-care? Are there any non-negotiable boundaries for you?
That is such a great question. I will tell you, early on, COVID, to be quite frank, that first month was exceptionally stressful. You know, the adjustment, of course, kids at home. We had, unfortunately, our COO in our nonprofit passed away. So there were many layers that occurred in that first month that were really intensive and just stressful. And then, like many people, sort of the Zoom world from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., balancing it all. My boundaries are, quite honestly, my time in the evening, and I learned this a long time ago. This really happened through my corporate world, is mine, right? In all cases, all the work that I do, none of it cures anybody. None of it is, you know, is going to affect, if I don't do it today, it's okay, right? Unless I have a deadline, of course. But I've had to come to terms with that a long time ago and just say, okay, this time is mine. No phones, no whatever. I need that time. I also take some time in the morning to do some yoga and a little bit of meditation, things like that, mostly yoga. I've been terrible at it recently, but that is, I have boundaries about time, for sure.
All right, our next question. What direction do you think nonprofits will go in if the virtual world is here to stay?
Oh, another great question. We've had a lot of conversation about this. You know, the most impact is, of course, funding and grants and volunteering. So 2 parts to that question. The first, on the funding and grants, depending on the sector of the nonprofit, much of that has been eliminated because a lot of funding and grants is going to essential needs, right? So food or healthcare or what have you, those spaces. And so, and people giving, you know, because of so much uncertainty, because of unemployment, there's a lot of confusion and question around what's going to happen with people giving. And so in the virtual world, we've got to create opportunities, and that really ties into the volunteering to make people still feel engaged with your nonprofit. And there is a big push on creating virtual volunteer opportunities. So whether it's, you can make thank you cards in your home, or, do some curbside pickups if it's shoes and clothes that are being donated, or what have you. I mean, there's a lot of thought around really becoming more virtual in this world, and doing things that appeal to people, in a sort of family base, if you will, whatever family means, right? So because there are multiple people probably in a home, they want to engage collectively as something to do. And so I think that's where the direction is how do we get creative about volunteer opportunities in a virtual world.
Okay. Our next question, are there any books, podcasts, people you would recommend as follow-up research for a young entrepreneur working in fundraising and nonprofit development?
Yeah. One, you may already follow this, but Axios, A-X-I-O-S, is really it's like a newsletter. Comes out daily, weekly, but it's a really great place where really you can follow everything that's happening in the nonprofit world. I think that one's a really good one. It's an easy read. It's similar to the format, if you're familiar with the Skim, like real quick tidbits, but it's a really good one. I just read a book called Second Hand. Adam Minter was the writer. That was excellent, really good. In fact, he actually, we got him he was kind enough to volunteer to speak to our entire nonprofit about sort of a book club. So that was a really good one. I think there are a few like that, but those are the two probably top of mind that I would recommend for sure.
Great. Those sound like excellent options. Our next question is, how did you build your local network?
A lot of events, networking. It's an interesting question because I had spent the bulk of my career prior to locally starting my company overseas. I was international. I did not have a network locally, although I had lived in Nashville. I live in Nashville. I had lived in my city for about 8 years at that time. I didn't have a huge local network, but what I leaned on were organizations, one, that I had interest in, but two, that would lend themselves to what I was trying to accomplish, which was get the brand name out there. And so I looked at women's networking groups locally. I looked at participating on boards or community activities where I knew they were more centralized and people, there's other small business owners or other independent retailers or people that I wanted to engage with were. So I sort of looked at, okay, what are the groups and the events that I could attend? And honestly, the first 12 months of thinking about my business, I literally went almost, it felt like every day, but it was definitely at least weekly to some sort of gathering, an event, or attended a webinar or whatever it is, and talk to people, anyone that I would meet. I was open to anybody, any discussion, just learning about other people, and it really opened my eyes to a whole nother world that I didn't even know existed. So I started with women's networking events, but really broadened it to just all events that I was curious and interested about. And if there were other leaders in the community that I had heard of or I'd read about, and this kind of sounds weird, but I would Google, like, are they speaking somewhere? And I'd go intentionally to try to meet them. So that was part of my strategy, was how to meet people. I went to these events.
Sounds good. And actually, I will ask a follow-up question on that one. With events really all going online and, like, there are no physical events, Like, is there advice that you would give in terms of building a network today?
Yeah, I think still really the same concept, but virtual, right? So what I found is most of these same groups that I had sort of sought after are now doing these events virtually. And you can still be on the video, you can see the screen, you can see everybody, and they usually share the list of attendees, or at least during the event you can see it, or if they're presenters, so you can still, same concept, you know, look for the presenters that you're looking for, and usually they'll share their contact information, or look for topics that you're interested in and go to the virtual events. It's a little harder because you can't, you know, talk one-on-one in that space. You could chat with someone during the meeting, but you can certainly follow up afterwards.
Nice. I will actually second that. We are heading to the end here, and Nancy, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. And I think that we will tell everyone that, reminder, they will be getting a copy of the recording, or a link to the recording, I should say. And folks, please give us some feedback. Tell us what you think. And thank you again, Nancy, for joining us. And for you two all at home, have a great day.
Thank you so much. Take care.